Welcome back, everyone, to WTF Is Up. I'm Omar,
And I'm Jeremy.
and we're so excited today to dig into a topic that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time, which is work hacks. Just little tips and tricks that we picked up over our careers that can help you get ahead and make sure people notice the great work that you're doing. And so we always try to get hands on in this podcast about things you can actually do, right? This episode is going to be all that, just little tips and tricks for managing your career. So, Jeremy, I'm going to start with the dad joke. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right, on our topic of work. Why are there so many Indian CEOs?
Oh, I'm not even going there.
They're real brown nosers.
My God. Okay. Well,
Sorry.
we're going to let Omar on that one.
This is,
Yeah.
for those of you not watching on video on YouTube, I'm Indian, so it's okay. I'm allowed to say that.
It's like that episode of Seinfeld where you don't want to be anti-dentite unless you're a dentist. Okay.
Exactly.
So all that said, let's earn back our audience's trust by laying down some of our very best work hacks.
All right, that was a really bad dad joke. Sorry for the offensive dad joke, but I thought it was funny. Okay, Jeremy, so here's a question I have for you. You know, we worked together for a long time. I feel like you have always had this intuitive sense of how to work hard, not necessarily, sorry. I feel like you have always had this intuitive sense of how to work smart, not necessarily hard. But you also work hard. I just remember you locking up your computer at the end of the days at LinkedIn, and we're not talking about like 8, 9 p.m. We're talking about like 4 or 5 p.m. like a normal person would, and maybe attempting to have that work-life balance. There may or may not have been times in your career where you have held down multiple jobs at the same time. So when I think of you, I think of efficiency. And yet you've been tremendously successful at LinkedIn. You got, promoted and all this responsibility, and everyone loved working with you. So like, what's that about? How have you thought about this general concept of working smarter, not harder? Or do I have the total wrong read and you're just grinding 23 out of 24 hours a day?
That's right. I really got my Jeremy GPT over here. I'm working away to make me look productive. But actually, I do think it comes down to a simple work hack that I was recently sharing with a reporter at Business Insider. She was talking about this frustration that a lot of millennial and Gen X managers are feeling with their Gen Z employees, where they feel like there's this value mismatch. The manager is focused on helping the company be successful. The Gen Z employee is focused on work-life balance or mental health or what have you, and there's no common ground. And what I told her is it doesn't have to be this either or, like either you succeed or the company succeed. You can get the best of both worlds. But coming back to our favorite topic, Omar, which of course is empathy. If you come into your work either as a brand new grad or someone who's mid-career, and your first question is, what are my boss's goals? How do I make my boss look awesome? All of a sudden, you actually have less to do, not more, because you've just narrowed down your focus to the few things that actually matter. Kind of like that classic Pareto principle thinking, what's that 20% of stuff that's going to drive 80% of results? And so, my challenge to everyone out there is if you've got this giant task list and you're feeling overwhelmed and work-life balance feels a million miles away, what ultimately matters on that list relative to the North Star you're seeking? So that's my number one tip. What do you think about that, Omar?
Yeah, I love that. And what you're saying is what really matters most on that list, like it or not, is what matters to your boss. And if you're super low level, it might be your boss's boss, like the head of a team. Listen to the stuff you hear out of your managers or your line managers or even the CEO's mouth. Like, listen to it like you would have a teacher or a professor in college where you're trying to figure out like what's going to be on the quiz, right? What's going to be on the final. And if you can, and they'll, if you really listen, they'll tell you the things that matter to them. Sometimes it's explicit. Other times it's like, they said that 4 times in the past week. Why don't I be the one to solve that? And so this is definitely a big work hack, is realizing that you don't work for the company. You don't even really honestly work for the CEO. You work for your boss, and you work for maybe your boss's boss, but primarily the person who sits right above you. So that's to say, let that focus your work, but also how can you make that person look good? Your boss in particular, everybody loves when they are made to look good. You work for your boss, right? That's a good place to start. All right, Jeremy, what else? What other things have you picked up over the years? I got some stuff too, but I want to know.
I'll give you one more from LinkedIn, but then I want to hear yours, Omar. And I think one of the things that really opened my eyes at LinkedIn is what I call kind of the middle school lunch effect. Now, I don't know about you, Omar. You were probably the cool kid in school. I never had to worry about this. But I spent a lot of middle school wondering, who am I going to have lunch with? How do I make sure I'm not just sitting by myself at this sad little table?
Oh,
And
that's
then
so
when you
sad.
then when you get to the corporate world, you realize those fears never go away because here's lunchtime. And of course, the easy sort of way out of all this is just have a sad work lunch at your desk, picking over some wilted salad as you stare into your computer screen for the 87th hour in a row. Or you could do the ultimate networking hack, which is to feed two birds with one scone. See what I did there? You could actually invite a new colleague to lunch every single day. And I know all the introverts out there are like, are you crazy, Jeremy? That sounds like my kryptonite. But think about it this way. Those people have the same exact fear that you do. They also don't want to have that sad work lunch at their desk. And so when you throw them a lifeline, they're going to be so excited to hang with you that it's going to be a fun conversation, even if you're not a natural extrovert. And I'll tell you right now, the people that I met at LinkedIn, the data analysts, the engineers, the product managers, people who did all the stuff that I've never done in my entire life. If it hadn't been for meeting those people, I never would have started this business with you, Omar, where we shared people how to break into the tech sector, how to explore all these different tech careers, because I wouldn't have known about all those pathways. So bottom line, you're not just helping out your social anxiety, but you're expanding your horizons so much more than you ever would eating lunch at your desk. That's my lunch hack.
That's good. I mean, you remember that book, Never Eat Lunch Alone or whatever it was? It's like cheesy, but it really does make a difference. And when you said this, Jeremy, I remembered you did this. You really did do this. You were frequently having lunch with people who in these like one-on-one relationships, just building those. And sometimes I would be the third wheel. They helped me. Like, but so what you got to do is just get past that inertia of just doing it, just putting it out there, try to ask somebody different every week, but also fight the compulsion to just stay at your desk and get shit done. What you have heard so far is me pointing out that Jeremy worked a normal workday when we worked together, at least a normal workday, and took time out to not sit at his desk and grind, but to build and deepen a relationship that would ultimately help him. And Jeremy, I remember those people all loved working with you. They would work their butts off for you. They would prioritize your projects above others. So this really does work. It seems silly and like, that it shouldn't be a hack, but it really is because we're all just people at the end of the day.
Okay, so now it's your turn, Omar. What did you discover across this crazy journey we call our careers about the best way to make the most of that time?
Well, I think about what the most in-demand skills are right now and the things that managers and hiring managers say that are in short supply, right? We all know it's AI, technical skills. We've talked about that in previous podcasts, AI literacy. As a result of that, there's judgment. There's sort of knowing what to do with that information, how to prioritize. Increasingly, though, it's things like communication. It goes back to those human-centered skills that we can't outsource to AI. And then really importantly, the biggest thing that I feel like is hard to find right now is hunger, is scrap, right?
Yes.
Is that like, I will figure it out. And I care way less if you have a fancy degree or even frankly, a credential or a specific skill set. Like it's awesome if you know how to use AI to do your job better, but everyone needs to do that now. I would much rather have somebody without a ton of pedigree who I know is just gonna nerd out on a thing they're working on and figure it out with real passion and enthusiasm and never give up in this.
Let me stop you right there, Omar, because I think a lot of people are listening to this right now and saying, I'm that person. I'm driven. I'm hungry. I want this. But how do you show that? How do you help the hiring managers, the Omars of the world, know that you're that person?
Yeah, a few things. So first is just doing shit. Okay. One of my biggest career mistakes, I feel like, was trying to work on a project or a product and not wanting to show it to people, especially my boss, until I felt like it was really ready. Just like going into a cave versus trying stuff, sharing works in progress. And nowadays, you can get pretty far along with AI, so it's not complete shit. Your first draft is not complete shit, right? So my first piece of advice would be don't wait for it to be perfect. Try shit, show people that you can move fast and share those iterations, making sure it meets a certain quality bar. Don't wait for perfection because guess what? It's
I was
never
gonna
going to
say,
come.
don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's only partly about the actual work you're doing. It's more about showing that you're doing the work, that you have that scrappy attitude and that you're going to go figure it out. So that's the first thing I
And
think you can
can
do
I give
about
a little
this.
example of that just to sort of bring it to life? I was hiring recently for the business. And one of the things that I noticed was everyone looks awesome now in this age of AI. Just like there are all these AI deepfakes that are becoming more and more real looking. Every resume, every LinkedIn profile looks awesome because it's been run through AI. The one thing that stood out in all these applicants for the job was there was one person who didn't just submit the application, but she went out and did all this research about my business and even said, hey, here are some clients you should consider. Here are some ways you could actually reach them. That hunger, that little hustle that was encapsulated in something that AI couldn't have done, that was the differentiator. That's why she got the job. So I don't think it has to be like, oh, you got to go out there and win the Nobel Prize in your industry. Just go a little bit beyond what the average person's going to do. But yeah, keep going, Omar. We need more of this.
Totally, totally. So you want to make sure you're adding value, right? And at the very least, not subtracting value. The way that you build a perception that you subtract value is when you put work on other people, right? Again, you want to be the opposite of that. You want to be the person who can absorb the work, figure it out, whatever it takes. And what I see often and have seen in all my jobs is people asking somebody else something before they take an earnest effort to solve it themselves. So, like, maybe Google something or ChatGPT something before you ask somebody else. Definitely before you ask your boss. Your coworkers are not here to solve your solvable issues, right? They are your partners in solving big collective team or organizational problems, but they're not there to do your job. So it's not just annoying, it raises a flag because it shows questionable judgment, it shows questionable work ethics. We were talking about building relationships earlier. Of course, part of that is because people talk within organizations, right? Not just in group meetings or with their bosses, but just in general social settings and everything, right? The thing that they talk about is not this person is a dumbass, right? What they talk about is this person is annoying because they put work on me. They talk
Yes.
about this person is unresponsive. There's a good thing. There's a good way to build a reputation as not being a doer, right? That
Yes.
he's all over the place or that he's checked out. Those are the kinds of things that people talk about. You don't want to build that reputation of being unreliable. You want to build the reputation of I take the problem as far as I can get on my own. And then I'm coming not just with problems, but with possible,
Yes.
maybe even the best possible
Yeah.
solution to the problem. That's when you
Yes.
engage people, not at the I have this problem phase, right? Just
And
fight that
let me connect
instinct
that back
to put
to
the problem on somebody else. Fight that instinct.
Yeah, let me connect that back to the very first thing that we were talking about, which of course is the E word, empathy. I think a lot of times when you're starting your career, you look at your boss and you're like, wow, they've got it easy. They're not really doing anything. I'm the one doing the sequel. I'm the one writing the emails. And yet, the number one thing that makes it tough to be a boss is that you have decision fatigue. Everyone is just dumping stuff on your plate. Omar, what should I
Yes.
do with this? How should I solve that?
Hmm.
And if you have someone who comes to you and says, I've actually pre-digested this decision a little bit. I'm seeking out your feedback. I would love your advice, but I've actually put it into a really good framework and I feel like we're close to a good decision. To me as a boss, that is manna from heaven. One less decision that has to keep me up at night. So bottom line, have a little empathy because heavy is the head that wears the crown.
And do the hard work, come with solutions, come with ideas to make the thing that you think needs to be done easily actionable. Just, hey, I've looked into these things. Here's the one thing I need from you, right? And it's not usually in the initial stages of solving a problem, it's in going to action against the solution. Fundamentally, what this comes down to is being engaged, right? So, how else can you show that you're engaged in your job outside of the ways we talked about? Jeremy, you got any ideas?
Yeah, so funny. There was just this huge article in the Wall Street Journal this week about how much bosses hate texting during meetings. Why is your phone pinging 100 times a minute? You're supposed to be engaged and paying attention. I think the number one way to engage, and this will be an ultimate hack across everything we've talked about, is to keep your eyes on the prize. I mean, we know we started with this idea of like, oh, you got to have Pareto principle, focus on what your boss wants. But you ultimately have to boil that down to not just 20%, but like one thing. What is that number that you're trying to move? Because I find that there are a lot of people in both corporate America and the nonprofit sector who are all about process. I worked on this for so long. I spent so much time involved in this thing, but they have nothing to show for it at the end of the day. And I feel like if you can be the opposite of that, the one person who puts points on the board, however you define it, whether it's dollars raised for your cause or revenue for your company, you can cut through a lot of that clutter and demonstrate the engagement the boss cares about. Because I don't just want you to be engaged like, yes, sir, but instead, like, hey, this is what you're going to be judged on. And that's what I'm focusing on as well. What's your take, Omar?
Yeah, that's great. I clearly see how you have done that throughout your career, engaging on the things that matter, helping bring focus to what those things are. And, it's one or two things, not 10 things. That's a value you can bring is helping say these are the things that matter and or inferring from the signals we talked about earlier, these are the things that matter, putting those points on the board and you'll know pretty quickly whether or not you're focused on the right thing when people do or don't react to that. My advice would be a little more tactical around how to just actually be engaged. Sometimes it can feel a little intimidating, especially if you're at the early part of your career or you're new in an organization, to engage in a group setting. My advice would be always, always, always say something in every meeting. And
Oh,
it might not be a brilliant idea, but it could be a brilliant question. And you could work on that skill set. Just throw that hand up, ask a question, do this in meetings, do this at all hands. I love to do this at conferences. Yes, I ask a good question, I'll get 5 people coming up to me afterwards at a conference, which is great for networking, right? So my advice would be speak up. Always say something. Try to, not just be engaged, but show that you're engaged, right? You're really listening.
let me play devil's advocate for a second here, Omar. I don't want to just give uncritical advice to our listeners. I think there are some people out there, maybe of the female persuasion, who are going to say, Omar, that sounds like this very bro-y thing. Like every dude in the meeting feels like they have to say something to hear their own voice. When you say speak up and say something, is there any kind of like filter on what you should say? Or is it just about getting your voice out there for others to hear?
I think the best thing is not necessarily to say something that you confidently believe is the right thing, but rather to advance the conversation in some way.
Mm,
And that's
mm.
why I like the idea of asking a question. That's always been my way in. In fact, I think my team at Salesforce gave me the dubious distinction of they gave me an award literally for most likely to extend the meeting with a question when the meeting was over. And so, you can take it too far, but I don't think that that's about being brash or putting yourself forward. It's more to signal that you care.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
that's the like cover that you get if you frame it as a question.
Yeah. Let me throw out another option. What if you are the kind of person who always speaks up in a meeting and you notice that there are some people who never speak up? Do you do that baller move, Omar, of saying, hey, what does Sarah think about it? What does Jose think about it? Give someone else a platform for a chance and start to bring more perspectives into the conversation.
This is where empathy comes in because that can backfire. Some
Sure.
people really don't want to be called on, and that's why they've been silent. But some people actually do have something to say and will appreciate that they've been asked to just say it. This is building those relationships and knowing who's in what category. It's also like picking up on subtle clues, right? Like if you see somebody trying to get in a couple times, or they're maybe raising their hand,
Yes.
or they're on Zoom and it's maybe harder for them to follow the conversation, but they typically do have something to say. Those are good candidates to be cold called. I wouldn't necessarily do it if I was like super junior, though. It just that comes across a little
Well,
weird. I don't know. What do you think?
here's the way I think I really encourage people to think about this is like, obviously, we all want to look good. We want to be seen by our boss, blah, blah, blah. But like being a good human is helping other people look good. I mean, I feel like going back to those lunches I was talking about, if I've just talked to some junior engineer and he threw out this really awesome marketing idea, I wouldn't hesitate to say, hey, I want to hear what Jackson has to say on this. Because again, I know from my previous conversation that he's got something really valuable to share, and he's probably reticent to do so given his status and position in the team. So I feel like if you can be the person who helps others shine as well as yourself, that's all for the good.
Yeah, totally, totally. Just recognize it might not be just by cold calling them,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I think
not
it's
cold calling in a business school sense.
It's generally really good advice to think about how you can get outside your role and help someone. Just mentally think about 10 to 20% of your job being to get outside of your job, like your actual core job, and try to help someone. Another thing I've really enjoyed doing, and I think it's helped me, is giving kudos to people. And that old rule of acknowledging publicly, but critiquing or maybe questioning privately. And I used to have this practice of like once a week, I would find somebody different if I could to give props to, and usually it would be like an email, and I would copy their manager just to be like, "Hey, you did a really,"
Yes.
could be a little tiny thing, right?
Yeah.
But talk about building some, fodder for a good relationship and even an expectation that they're gonna help you, because that human instinct to reciprocate is really, really strong. It's one of the strongest human instincts that we have. It's actually not even just human. This has been found in like monkeys and right, which is like our societies and survival are built on helping one another. And when you do something for somebody, it creates, even if it's subconscious, an expectation that they're going to help you.
Yeah, you know what? I just had a total epiphany, Omar. Here we are talking about corporate America's cubicle life. What we're really talking about is how to build a better world. We are in this moment right now where everyone's angry, societies are torn apart. If we all just helped others be a little more successful, maybe we wouldn't be in this moment at all. Anyway, back to you, Omar.
All
What
right.
else can folks do out there in Dilbert land?
Kumbaya. Back to corporate, no, back to
Yes.
Dilbert land though. I do have one other thing which people don't realize, which is when is performance review time? Do you see meetings on your boss's calendar that say like calibration? You know what those things are. If you've been in an organization for any length of time, you know when that performance review cycle is happening. Don't forget that we all have recency bias. That's the time when you should be buckling down the hardest. This is the time when you should not just be delivering real value, but making sure people know, in particular your boss, that you have that value. And it's not a mystery. This is like, yeah, I don't know, a 1 to 3 month window when you know people are going to be evaluating your performance and usually comparing you to other people. That's the time when you got to make sure that your boss knows what you're doing and that you're doing it well.
Yeah, so important. And I think the biggest takeaway from a lot of the advice we've given, even across other episodes, is like don't treat humans like robots. I think
Yes.
sometimes like when we apply for jobs and we have a job, we assume that our boss or the hiring manager is like this all-seeing robot that's grading us like on a Scantron basis. Humans are just like ourselves. We hopefully where everyone listening is a human. They have their frailties, they have their weaknesses. And one of those things, as you said, Omar, is that we don't have access to all information at all times. So really pave the way, help your boss see what's possible at the time when the moment is right. I love that.
And because we're humans, we take shortcuts. We have biases, right? We have recency bias. We have the need to reciprocate. We have just this instinct to do things for people who we like. So all of that seems obvious, but it's really important if you can figure out how to actually do it. I have one other category of things that I want to talk about, which is faux pas or maybe hacks for interviewing in particular, because I do a lot of this and I'm sure you do too, Jeremy. And there's just some things I've noticed that people just get wrong and it's silly and could be easily corrected. Okay. So, the first thing is never frame things as I want to learn how to do this job, right? Especially right now, you're not going to get hired based on that you can learn to do a job. It's that you've already done it. It's that you clearly can do it and contribute right away, right? So that is just a framing thing, especially if you're early in your career. It can be tempting to be like, oh, I just want to learn. No, you're contributing. Jeremy, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really advanced kind of thing because a lot of times when people are starting to job seek, especially as students or new grads, the focus is on all about potential. And of course, you're still learning, you're still growing as a professional, totally understandable. But I think the problem is that we play that student card too long. Where yeah, it's great if you're going to get an internship after your freshman year, but if you are out there in this brutal economy, your primary focus isn't about, oh, I'm still a student. It's about how do I convince this other human being on the other side of the table to see the value I can unlock for them. And that value is not your learning. That value is not giving you a name brand on your resume. That value is not paying for your health insurance. That value is getting stuff done in the real world. And you
Yep.
want to take every good piece out of your brain, transfer it through the power of rhetoric into your boss's brain, future boss's brain, let them start to see what it's going to look like and feel like to have you by their side.
Yeah. What can you do now? What do you know now? How are you going to make me look good? Right. And another piece of interviewing advice I have is like going back to this premise in an AI era, we have to be able to connect with humans. Don't be a bot. Is that humans need specifics. And even if a question you're asked is fairly generic, always, always, always give an example. Even if you're not asked the like, tell me a time question, you got to make it real for people. Okay. It's also totally okay to pause to formulate a great response. Don't just jump in and ramble into something that might have a nugget of an insight somewhere in there. Find the nugget, then open your mouth. All right, I got a couple more on interviewing because this stuff just drives me crazy.
Let me actually just jump in with something real
Yeah.
quick, Omar. And that is, I think you're so right. And I actually want to connect this back to what we were just talking about with once you get the job. I think that you want to tell great stories, not just in the interview room, but for the rest of your career. If you're the person who kicks off a meeting with a really killer anecdote, if you do a presentation for your company and you get people laughing and engaged and excited, that's a skill that's going to take you so far, especially in an age when AI can do all the technical stuff. So please start with the STAR framework, start with the basics of human storytelling, but really build that craft no matter what path you're on, because this can become so much more valuable, not just from the interview room, but for the rest of your career. Back to you,
Yeah,
Omar.
and
What else is important? Yeah.
do that throughout that's another human bias, right? We love stories from a very young age. And Jeremy, I just remembered when you said that we had something in our team marketing meetings where like people would give presentations every week on different things they were working on. And it's like usually fairly generic. I did this thing, here are the results I got. And didn't you do one with like a Star Wars theme that you just really committed to and carried throughout the whole thing?
Well, I have
Was
to
this
plead it partial insanity because I did it right after I came back from paternity leave, so I was probably pretty sleep deprived. But yeah, remember this.
Yeah,
Here's the ultimate human thing. What do we want when we climb Maslow's hierarchy? When we've taken care of basic survival? We want fun. We want to enjoy life. Just because you're in cubicle land doesn't mean the fun has to die. Be the person who brings fun to the team, not just sucks it out.
totally. Well, it's crazy that I remember that, and I could tell you nothing about any other presentation that anybody in this huge team ever gave, except for the fact that you did one that had that theme. So, and it wasn't like, oh, this is so kitschy, and he is not actually delivering real content here. It was just, we're humans, you know. How dare you mix a little bit of fun with with the seriousness of work? But it works if you can figure out strategically how to do it. Okay, my last piece of advice for interviewing is not necessarily the same. This might be one thing that you don't want to necessarily use in the job itself, but when you're being interviewed for a job, the biggest mistake that I see is people using we language when they're giving those examples instead of I language. And I'm curious how you feel about this, Jeremy, but it's always hard for me to decipher what did you really do in this example you're giving if you're using we language? Was it really your coworker who got that result? Was it really your boss who took that initiative? I want to know what you did. So think more about I language than we language. When you get into the job, it's all about the collective and how you can raise everybody's profile, right? And by doing that, as we've said, you raise your own. But in interviews, I think it's a big no-no to overly focus on the team contributions. This is your chance to say what you did.
Yeah, you know what I just realized, Omar, is what we're really handing down to the next generation are almost like cultural codes, like unwritten rules that maybe are driven a little bit by our species biology, but also by the culture we live in. And there's such a big difference between an interview and a work setting, because you're right. If you're the guy in a meeting for the next 5 years who's like, I, beating your own chest, no one wants to work with that guy. But if you're the person in the interview room who's we, no one hires that guy. And so really, I'm starting to understand that context is everything in our culture and in our work culture. That is so important. Great call out, Omar.
Okay, so Jeremy, any final work hacks for people, whether it's in the process of getting a job? By the way, we should plug our book, which is all about how to hack your way into a new and better job, maybe even your dream job, or hacks for being in the job.
Yeah, so I'll leave you with one final hack to try to tie it all together here, which is why do we work? Why do we do these interviews in the first place? And obviously, as mentioned, we've got to take care of our foundational Maslow's hierarchy needs, but we're also looking for meaning. We're looking for a chance to self-actualize, as Maslow would say at the very top of that hierarchy. And my challenge to everyone out there is when you go into your next meeting or into your next interview, don't just come in with blindly, how do I check off this box and move on? Take a little time to reflect on who you are and what you're actually trying to achieve on this planet. Because as Steve Jobs, our former employer, once said, our time on this planet is limited. Don't waste it living someone else's life. Find out what is important to you. And I think if we can bring that into our meetings, into our interviews, into our work, we're going to be a lot closer to that top of the pyramid than the bottom. So that's my advice.
That's great. And for all of us, it feels a lot better to not just try to get up to the top of Maslow's hierarchy ourselves, but to help others get there too. And the probably cheat code to life is that human connection is what we're wired for. So if that's got to be part of your reason for working, and if you just remember that, make time for that, it's going to help you immensely. For as much as I love the career that I've had so far, it's less about the actual work that I did or the companies that I did it for, and more about the people that I was able to build relationships with. And here we are, talking as one of those key relationships that I'm so glad endured beyond our job, 10 years ago. So that's a great note to end on. Remember the people, remember that you're on this journey together, and good luck, everyone.